I call Eugenie Sage.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, thank you. I think, well, the Green Party is pleased to support the Wildlife Powers Amendment Bill, but I think we risk some of the government members actually overstating what is in this bill when they talk about it being modernised. The bill is quite narrow in its ambit. It deals with improving the enforcement of the Wildlife Act, but there is a need for a major overhaul of that Act, and this government lacks the vision to both adequately support the Department of Conservation through ensuring that funding is adequate. We can hear lots of speeches from government members talking about the important work that departmental staff do, the importance of the department's mandate in protecting our Indigenous plants and wildlife and our special landscapes, but we don't see a commitment in the budget to actually adequately resourcing that work. We don't see a commitment to ensuring that, well, yes, the Minister may have a vision of predator-free 2050, but it's the Green Party through our taonga levy that has actually come up with a practical proposition to provide the funding to support it, rather than the very ad hoc measures that the Minister has proposed just to provide a bit of additional funding for kiwi and a bit of additional funding tomorrow for wilding control, a project we support, but a total underinvestment in conservation through the continued cuts to conservation funding that we have seen under this government. The government is very good at getting the headlines with all its PR about how well species are doing, but it fails to look clearly at what bycatch is happening and the continued underfunding of conservation. So this bill is very narrow in its scope, Mr Speaker. What we need is an overhaul of the bill, to overhaul of the whole Act, to protect native fish species, because it is under the Wildlife Act that we see most of our native birds protected, except the Minister's saying it's out of scope, but if the Minister had had some vision, she would have embarked on a more comprehensive review of the Wildlife Act, because the Minister in this government doesn't seem to care about the fact that 72% of our native fish species are threatened with extinction, yet not one existing native fish is protected by the Wildlife Act. The only fish that is the grayling, and that is extinct, Minister. So if the government had some vision, we would be looking at a much more comprehensive overhaul of the Act to protect native fish, to protect a taonga like the tuna, the long-finned eel, which is still being fished to extinction, and as the Parliamentary Commissioner has said, is on a slow pathway to extinction. So while, Mr Speaker, this bill will be useful in increasing the powers that the warranted officers within the Department of Conservation have available to stop, intervene and prevent offending, it will increase their ability to stop a person if they think they're about to commit an offence. It will allow them to stop their vehicle but not hold a person for questioning. It will allow them to request identity verification and date of birth, and it will allow them the power to seize a broader range of materials that are connected to offending, for example, mobile phones and the like. But this is not the first time we've amended the Wildlife Act. We had a private member's bill in 2013 which increased the penalties for offending, which is all well and good like this bill. But it is not actually addressing the critical issues of loss of biodiversity and the fact that our native fish don't have any protection under the Act. The whitebait season has started again, and yet most New Zealanders don't realise that the juveniles of the 5 native species that make up the whitebait catch, the koaro, the short-jawed kokapoo, the giant kokapoo, are threatened with extinction. And that's the sort of change that we need to be seeing to the Wildlife Act, actually providing protection for these species, and the Department of Conservation ensuring that there are adequate freshwater fish reserves to protect them, not just fiddling by improving the offence provisions. And, Mr Speaker, the Green Party is supporting it. We will consider the SOP that the Labour Party is proposing to put forward, because the advice that we had in Select Committee was that because it was warranted officers, state servants, Department of Conservation, that they should have these powers, and employed staff of the Fish and Game, but not honorary officers, because that was extending the powers too far. But, Mr Speaker, it's been a disappointing gap in the Wildlife Act that there is no protection for our Indigenous native fish, because they are every bit as important as our native birds, our skinks, our lizards, which this bill is designed to protect through trying to stop smuggling and the export and capture of those species. But the government should be amending the law in a much wider way to provide proper statutory protection for all of our native wildlife, and not just the native birds, the reptiles, a few species of invertebrates that are currently listed in the bill. But we do support the increase in the provisions to stop offending. Thank you.